My name is Jonas Pilz. I work for Maxon in the marketing department. Also hello to the guys on the internet watching the live stream. And yeah, today I want to show you our awesome new release, which is Cinema 4D Release 20. And I want to start by showing you some of the artworks that have been created during the last year. And you see from year to year, the quality is getting better and better. And right now, you just see photorealistic stuff for VFX, for visualization, for character design, for landscaping in this case here, for all kinds of stuff. So Cinema 4D is used in every branch that has something to do with creating images. And yeah, it's just amazing how good these pictures are, these renderings. All right, let's start with Cinema 4D Release 20. This is the splash screen, and we have a very, strange situation this year, because we won't start with the small stuff and get to the bigger stuff in the end of the presentation. We have so many good features that we have to start with the exciting stuff, with the real cool stuff. So, multi-instances is the first one that I want to show you. So what are multi-instances? Basically, they are a new way of calculating instances, clones, for example. And this method is very efficient. This way, it's much faster to render, and you also need less memory compared to render instances, for instance. You can find the multi-instances in the cloner and in the instance object. And this is the great thing. You can go very high with the clone count, and you can still navigate in the viewport because we've got these new viewport modes. So instead of showing the full objects, you can bring the object visualization in the viewport down to bounding box, matrix, points, or you can turn it off completely, and this way you can handle millions of clones in the viewport and work fluently. So here is a small example. We start by adding more and more pencils here. Right now we are at 50 by 50, and we're raising the count here until we reach 1 million pencils in the viewport here. And you can still navigate this. That's just awesome. Here's another rendering, and another one with some use cases. It's brilliant for landscaping. Like here, you see all of the trees are multi-instances. Every single one coming with a very high clone count. Here, it's the same, like a crowd. 22,500 characters with 18,000 polygons each. And rendered on a notebook. Yeah, here we've got the same thing animated. And a few other examples, like for macro shots. It's very cool to add some more detail. And also this is very nice. Some space architecture of some alien race or something. Created with multi-instances. Polygonal grass. So each of these, grass blades is a polygon object. Look at this. I mean, it's just amazing. You can go very close and it still looks very realistic. Also this one. And here is my favorite one, completely created inside of Cinema 4D. All of the trees are multi-instances, and it's rendered in physical renderer. And I really love the atmosphere of that shot. It's just amazing. Okay, let's come to the next feature I want to show you, or the next set of features, which are the motion tracker improvements. With Release 20, we focused on the user experience, because the motion tracker was quite capable before Release 20, but now, we cleaned it up in order to make using it a good experience, or a better experience. And the first thing we created was a new motion tracker layout that is very easy to use. Here on the right side, you see that there is a text saying double click to create a motion tracker object. So you can just double click to create a motion tracker object, and then double click again to select a footage, and select it, and with 6 clicks you can start tracking that shot. Another thing you see in the motion tracker layout is that there were some changes made on the right side, and I want to start with this new user track list. So in manual tracking, we've got a new list of manual tracks, and you've got a better overview now. You can create folders to structure your tracks. You can also rename them directly in the list. You can adjust the size and the search area inside of the list. You also see a visual indication of the color channel that you're actually tracking. You can lock separate tracks, and you can set separate tracks to be a circle shape instead of a rectangle shape. So this is a very nice addition. And the other nice addition here is the motion tracker track view, which is an additional window. And what happens here is that the track is locked in its position and the footage moves around. And this way you can really see if your track is stable or not. And in addition to that, you can also check tracker view, and then you see what the tracker actually sees. So if the contrast is not high enough, for example, you can track the red channel instead of the luminance, and you would see the adjustment of the contrast in the motion tracker track view window. Then we've got a visual indication for the tracking direction. So what you see here, for example, is a bi-directional keyframe, which is yellow, and it tracks to the front, or to frame 0, and to the frames behind it. And you see there is an arrow on every single keyframe, and here they meet. There is a keyframe that's going to a frame that's going to the right and one that's going to the left, and that means, okay, here is a point where these frames here come from this keyframe and the other ones come from the next keyframe, and this is very good for debugging tracks. If you've got some error in there, you know the keyframe which this is coming from. Then we've got pattern snapping. That's also very nice. So imagine you're tracking a pattern, like this one, and you track it, and then you come to a point where the pattern is hidden by a foreground object, for example. And then you scrub forward, and what you see up there is the pattern that you tracked before reappearing. And then you can move the track to this position, hold down Shift, and it will automatically snap back into the pattern that you tracked before, and you can just continue tracking. So also a very nice workflow addition. Then we've got virtual keyframes, which are like automated keyframes. Also very useful, for example, when you have rotating patterns. So this is a very extreme example to show you what is happening. Here we've got this checkerboard, so we've got areas that are black and areas that are white. If I rotate this page or this piece of paper by 90 degrees, this pattern is completely the opposite. Everything that is black now would be white then, and the same thing with the areas that are white right now. So there will be an error, and when I tracked before, this is what happened. So I couldn't track this automatically, because it loses the pattern. With virtual keyframes enabled, it will set an automated keyframe every time the error threshold is exceeded, and this way it will stay stable. So there was no additional manual keyframe in between. This is just by setting virtual keyframes, or Cinema 4D does this for me. If we have a look at the graph view, this is how it looks if virtual keyframes are off. So we've got the first keyframe here, which is yellow. Then the other frames are green, which means this is good. And then they are turning red, which means that the error threshold is, exceeded. With virtual keyframes turned on, with frame interval, you set a keyframe a virtual keyframe, which is indicated with this bluish color. Every 5th keyframe. You can also set this up to be every 10th frame. And we also can set virtual keyframes by using the error threshold. And once it's exceeded or almost exceeded, it sets an automated keyframe here. And you see that the whole row here is green, and that means that the track, is stable. Okay, there are some other improvements. 2D mode, which means that we can now, navigate with or in tracking like we would do it in the viewport, which is very nice. So all of the selection tools are now supported, and also the common shortcuts work. And the other thing is multi-selection and editing of mask points, so masking out objects that you don't want to track, like a person walking through the footage, is now much easier than before. So here are 2 examples. This is the first one that I tracked and made. I made a scene reconstruction of that tree and made this alien fungus-like crystal thing grow, using another very exciting feature from Cinema 4D release 20. And here's another example. Basically the same workflow. I tracked it, I reconstructed it. Yeah, here's the breakdown. Thank you very much. Okay, next thing, ProRender enhancements. With the last release 19, we introduced ProRender, our integration of ProRender, and with R20 we enhanced it. And here are some of the cool features that are now available in ProRender. So, out-of-core texture streaming is very nice if you want to render a very heavy scene that has a lot of textures in it, because normally everything that has to do with the render needs to fit into the GPU memory. And this includes the scene itself, this includes all of the textures, and this includes the rendering. But with out-of-core texture streaming, you can, create bigger textures or use more textures inside of your scene, and those are not directly stored on the GPU, but in the memory or on the disk, and then streamed to the GPU for rendering. And this way you can render much bigger or heavier scenes. Then we've got motion blur, also very cool. We've got 2 types of motion blur. One is linear motion blur, which is good for animation of position or rotation or scale of objects, but it is not capable of motion blurring like object deformation, and therefore you need subframe motion blur, which we also support. Subframe motion blur subdivides a frame into subframes, so to speak. In this case it's 16 subframes, and then it blends those images together. A short tip here: you can divide the amount of iterations that you set up by the number of samples that you use here in order to speed up the rendering. That's very cool. And here's the T-Rex with motion blur. We also have subsurface scattering now in ProRender. A new subsurface scattering shader directly developed for ProRender. It's very easy and very simple in its interface. And these are the effects that you can create with it. You see it on the ear. It's the typical subsurface scattering effect. This is without subsurface scattering, and this is the octopus with subsurface scattering enabled. Here we've got another object, like a plastic object, where you also need subsurface scattering to improve the realism or to increase it. Some raspberries here. And another cool thing that is really, really necessary for production, which is multipasses. So we now have multipasses inside of ProRender. These are all of the multipasses that you can choose. You can also choose to anti-alias single or separate multipasses. And, well, if that makes sense in your workflow. OK, this is the final image. And here we've got all of the multipasses that you can create. It's direct illumination, indirect illumination, luminance, environment. We've got the world coordinates, texture coordinates, geometry normal, shading normal, and some object and material IDs, and also depth, of course. These are the channels that you can render separately using multipass rendering. Besides this, we've got a few other things that are supported in Release 20. For example, the physical sky, also the MoGraph color shader, so you can now render cool motion graphics effects, also using ProRender. And we've got separate ray depths for the different ray types, like diffuse rays, refraction, reflection rays, and so on. Multi-instances are also supported in ProRender, which is amazing. We even had one case in a test scenario where ProRender was faster than the viewport using multi-instances. We now have a shadow catcher with ProRender, and also all 2D noises are now supported and not baked anymore. Okay, here is some artwork rendered with ProRender. Look at this. I mean, it's just amazing. Oh, this one. Every time I watch it, I see something new. It's just incredibly detailed and very lovely. Okay. Next topic. One thing that was requested by our users for a long time, and now we have it inside of Cinema for the Release 20. I'm talking about node-based materials. So finally, the power of nodes comes to Cinema 4D. The fully supported renderers are standard and physical renderer. ProRender is also supported, but it will bake all textures. So some of the effects are not possible to achieve, but this is why I have this slide here. The completely supported renderers are the standard and the physical renderer. And nodes are actually very small pieces of code that you can wire up in order to create a very complex node graph in a graphical interface like Expresso. And this is how it looks like. So here on the left side, we've got a list of all nodes that are inside of the node view here. Then we've got a list of all nodes, an information area, the node area, and the attributes manager on the right side. This is the node structure, so we've got the name, of course, of the node and a preview, but we also have all of the inputs, and they are color-coded depending on the data type, and all of the output ports. In this case, it's just one, but it can be multiple output ports. We also can toggle the preview in order to save some space, and we can solo separate nodes, which is also amazing if you really want to see what a single node does. And yeah, that's very useful. So here is a workflow video. You can simply drag and drop assets from the asset area here into the node view, and this will create a node. And you can wire it up. You can also press C to open up the node commander and drag and drop or hit enter to create the node here. Another cool thing that you can do is you can directly drag and drop a node onto an input port or an output port of another node, and it will automatically create a connection, which is very useful. Then you can drag and drop images from outside of Cinema 4D, from the Finder or from the Windows Explorer, to the node view, and it will automatically create a new node, and the image will be linked to it. Then we've got converter nodes. These are nodes that you can place on an existing connection, and you can delete them, and the connection will still be intact. Here you see it again with drag and drop. You see that the mouse cursor adjusts. Just release it, and here is the converter node. Okay, another cool thing is that the search here is context sensitive. So if I want to have a Luca noise, I can just type in Luca, and if I create a noise node from that, it will automatically create a noise node set to Luca, for example. Yeah, you can drag wires, multiple wires from one port to another. You can mute wires, and so on. It's a really great workflow. You can also search for separate nodes with the search field on top of the node area here. So search them by name. And here's another cool thing. If you have got a more complex node setup and you want to save some space, you can use these icons here to make some of the ports invisible. You can do that with single nodes or with multiple nodes. You can also group nodes, which is very cool. So now I made a group of all of these nodes. The group is indicated by this small arrow icon that you see here. And you can rename this, of course, and you can click this arrow icon in order to dive into the group and see which nodes are inside of that group. On the left side, you see all of the ports that are exposed to the node interface, and on the right side, you see all of the ports that are output ports. So inputs on the left, outputs on the right. And you can start creating new ports that are exposed to the node, rename them, add a few more, and if you go back here in the breadcrumb, you see that all of these ports are added to the node, and yeah, you can just use them. Another cool thing that I will show you later is setting this up as a start node, and this way the interface of the node will be exposed to the material manager. This way you don't have to dive into the node setup and can work in the material manager. Okay, if you want to create an interface yourself, for example, you want to adjust the threshold parameter, not to be like a float value here, but you want this to be a percentage, and you also want to have a slider. You can go to the resource editor, which is also new, and just add all of these. Here in the data section, you can adjust the unit to be percentage values, and you can also go down to the UI section and check use slider, and then you've got your slider interface that you can use. Another important point when working with nodes is assets. Assets are, well, basically nodes. We provide you with assets. Every single node that you create is an asset. But in order to share it with your colleagues, with friends or whoever, you need to create assets. And this way you can store nodes or node setups you created yourself. You can store them on the hard drive. So you've got a group and you save it as an asset. You can change the name. You can adjust the version. So we've got versioning inside of nodes. You can also create new categories. In this case, I create a test category. And once you hit OK, you see that an asset is created. So this looks just like a normal node that you create inside of Cinema 4D, because it doesn't have this this group icon anymore. And you see that it's now also part of the asset list. So you can use it multiple times and instance it, so to speak. You can also update these assets, and this is very cool. If you have got a company, for example, and you've got one guy who's very much into nodes, this guy can create materials for all of your other employees and just store it on the server, and all of the others can use those materials with a very easy to use interface, because you can set up the interfaces manually. Okay, so we've got this node setup. This was version 1 of the asset, and then I add a few ports and a few groups here in order to make it better readable. And then you go save to save new version. You already know this pop-up here. The version tag is now 1.1, and this will create the new asset. And then you can switch between asset versions in your node setup. By default, it uses always the latest one, but you can still go down to 1.0, and now you have the old node, and so on. Okay, if you want to share your assets, as I told you, with your colleagues, with friends, other artists, or with your family, you know, wives and girlfriends always like flower assets, for example. You can do that by simply right-click on the asset in the asset list here and export the selected asset, and then it will be stored on the hard drive as a zip archive, and you can re-import this, for example, and use it on multiple machines. But here's the good news for those who are a bit scared of nodes. You don't have to touch nodes at all, unless you want to. Because what we provide you with is a function that is called set as start node. And what this does is, if you select a node and you set it as a start node, it gets a green outline, which is incredible. But the even better thing is that it exposes the interface of that node to the material manager, and then you can work as you're used to work with materials from the old material system. Okay. But we also made it very easy for you and recreated our old material system using the node system, and this is done in the Uber material. So what you have here is a node-based material that has the interface, or almost the interface, of our old material system. You've got all of the channels, you can enable them, disable them, and you've got all of the parameters that you need, and you can add new nodes to these or add new shaders. And this is very, very powerful. We also provide you with more presets, like a car paint material or a concrete or a gold or metal material. And those materials come with this reduced material interface that I mentioned before. Look at this. We just have 3 channels here: the base, the flakes, and the gloss channel. And they've got a very reduced interface. So here you can set up the flakes of the car paint material. Here you can set up the gloss or the clear coat. And in the base channel, you can set up the color. And you can create those materials yourself using the node-based material system. OK, here are some examples of what you can do with nodes. Yeah, this shows the use case or the strength of nodes pretty good or pretty well. So you've got an image, and you do something with it. In this case, you make 4 images out of it, increase the contrast, and colorize it. And if you replace this image with another image, you just have to do that in one place, and everything else will adjust. And this is actually the power of nodes. Here I created a wireframe shader. So this is not a post effect. This is a real wireframe shader. You can adjust the color. You can adjust the thickness of the wireframe based on other shaders, for example, a noise. Here I've created a video cassette shader. So everything except for the video cassette image or images is completely procedural. Here we've got a paint example, which turns, well, just a photograph into a painting. Here I created a CMYK printing pattern shader. Some sketch effects. And this is all on shader basis. This is not a post effect or a 2D effect. This is real shading here. This is another artwork created using node-based materials. And this is actually my favorite one. So what you see here is, well, the facade of a house. But look at the geometry. It's this scene, and everything else was created in the shader with the node-based material. So all of the parallax here and all of the rooms, this is just, well, a node-based material. And here's the final shot again. It's just amazing what you can create with it. The flexibility is like infinite. It's just crazy. OK, but we've got some other topics that I want to cover. One very important thing, especially for me or for the past me, is CAD Import. I used to work in industrial visualization, and I had to deal with CAD files a lot. And I always had to use a third-party application, and it always bothered me because I had to learn it, and yeah, it didn't work just as Cinema 4D. So Now we have it inside of Cinema 4D, and I'm really happy about that. The supported formats are STEP, IGES, JT, CATIA, and SolidWorks. And here is the workflow. It's very easy. Just drag and drop a CAD file into Cinema 4D, make some adjustments to the settings if you need to, and in the end, it all comes to pressing OK. Then you have to wait. But it's really fast, actually. And then you've got the CAD model inside of Cinema 4D. And it's completely tessellated. It has very clean tessellation. And in the Object Manager, you see that instancing is supported, and it's a very clean scene structure. So you don't have multiple null objects, for example, that don't have anything inside of them or as a child, except for other null objects that are empty. So this is a very clean scene structure. And here are some of the settings that you can make. For example, you can adjust the scale, you can choose what to import, and you can make some adjustments, optional adjustments to the normals, for example, to the display colors, to the layers, and how you want to create materials. So here's another cool thing. You can combine objects, and you can really tidy up the scene structure using the modifications section here. One thing that is important, you can swap the Y and Z axis, because CAD programs normally have the Z axis up, and 3D programs have the Y axis up. And yeah, if you import it like that, it comes with an object count of 3,643 objects, which is quite a lot. But if you check Optimize Hierarchy, you see that it brings it down to 2,300. Then you can combine objects, for example, by topology. So whenever you have two objects that are touching each other, they will be combined. And it brings the object count down to 1,793. Then you can combine by color. So every single display color that was used in the CAD file will now result in one object. In this case, it's 79, depending on the amount of colors that you created. And finally, by combining it by layer, in this case, there was just 2 layers, so you've got 2 objects left. You can also adjust the tessellation. This is the original tessellation, but you can also add some homogeneous tessellation by bringing up the maximum length of the edges. And you can tessellate based on the scale of an object. So bigger object will be tessellated higher or with a better quality than smaller object, like screws, for example. Normally, you don't need that much detail in a screw, but in the bigger object. And this is what scale-based tessellation does. Of course, you can set up the import settings in the preferences. So if you have a specific setting that you want to use all of the time, just set it up once here in the preferences, and then you never have to, adjust the settings anymore. You can just drag and drop a CAD file into Cinema 4D and press OK, and then you have it. Here are some renderings that were made using physical renderer, I think. And here comes the interesting part. Look at this. Look at what's possible with node-based materials. This is what you normally have when you import a CAD file. Have a closer look to the edges. Rounded edges based on a shader. So this can be done by using node-based materials. And this is just a setup of 3 nodes. With round edges. You can create an edge sexification shader. It's brilliant. OK, one of my favorite features is fields. So what are fields? Basically, fields are a replacement for all fall-offs you have inside of Cinema 4D. They are a unified weighting system in Cinema 4D. And they come with a very cool interface, which is layer-based. So now the fall-offs, which are now called fields, are separate objects, and you can layer them like in Photoshop. And you have options for what you want to modify, like the values, like position, scale, and rotation, or the color, or you can adjust the blending modes, or the opacity. And here is a list of all fields that are available. So you've got some fields that were available as fall-offs. Actually, all of the old fall-offs are available here, plus some more, like for example here a formula or a Python or yeah, a sound field. And we've got modifier layers. And these are really cool because they work just like adjustment layers in Photoshop. You have a value and you can remap it. Yeah, field objects come as separate objects, and this has a very big advantage. Now you can place objects or fall-offs somewhere in 3D space, and everything that passes it will react to this fall-off, if you want that. And here is a small video. So here I'm showing that the fall-off tab has changed completely. We now have the layer-based interface. I'm going through the fields here again. And in addition to what I told you, you can also enable and disable separate fields here in the layer-based field list. And in the Objects Manager, you see that these fields are separate objects that you can move, that you can scale, rotate, whatever you want. So you can adjust the remapping inside of the field object. You've got a lot of settings. You've got a visual indication for what you're doing. You can also set this to step. This is looking really cool if you use it with a random field, with a noise, for example. You can also create colors inside of the fields, and the effectors will react to it. And another cool thing is that you can use a field in multiple effectors or in multiple places all over Cinema 4D at once. So now I'm using it in a plane effector as well as in a random effector. And once I move this one field, the effectors will react. You can add really cool growing effects using the new fields. You've got a freeze field here, and you can set it to grow mode, and then you will have a growing effect. You can enable field directions, and this way you can make objects point towards a single object or the closest point on the object. You can also make them point towards the brighter areas of a noise. You can use fields in deformers, so by using fields, every deformer actually turns into a MoGraph effector. You can also modify vertex maps with fields. And this is very powerful because now we have easy-to-use vertex map tools. I mean, look at this. It's just incredible. They are completely procedural. You can add growing effects. This growing effect is made with particles. You can also use fields in selections, polygon selections, edge selections, and point selections. So in this case, I'm using it as a modeling tool in a bevel deformer. So the bevel deformer is restricted by these fields here. And here is the important thing. Fields can be used in all of these contexts simultaneously. And these are not all contexts. Here we have MoGraph, deformers, vertex map, polygon selection, and point selection. And you see, I move the field through all of these, and everything reacts. And so much more. For example, volumes or dynamics forces or MoGraph weight maps and so on. Everything that has to do with the weight can now be used with fields, or fields are the replacement for the weighting system, so to speak. Okay, here is how you can make fields available in vertex map. Simply check use fields, and then you've got the layer list here and can add up fields. Oh, wait. So here's another video where I create a grow effect based on a vertex map. And then I adjusted the animation speed of the noise, and you see how the vertex map looks like. And this is how the clones are reacting to this. It's really amazing what you can do with fields. Wet maps. You can also create wet maps using fields. Look at this. And the key to this is the decay field. You can use it in cloth, because you can use vertex maps almost everywhere inside of Cinema 4D. Parametric selections. I showed that to you before in the video, but here you see I move around this spherical field and the polygon selection reacts to it dynamically. It's just awesome. Here again used as the modeling tool, but I will skip this because you already saw it. And I made a Pong game in a polygon selection, which is very easy. So yeah, you can now play games inside of Cinema 4D, inside of polygon selections. You can also control edge selections with fields. And yeah, control a bevel deformer with it. Or a point selection. This is also created using a bevel deformer in points mode. This is very funny if you use it in combination with fracturing. And here is another example how you can use it. So the growing effect here is also created with fields. Yeah, the possibilities are endless. That's just amazing. Okay, the last feature I want to show you is volume modeling. So we now we integrated the VDB, OpenVDB library into Cinema 4D and made a modeling tool out of this. So here are the new tools that you have. It's 2 generators, 2 filters, and a volume loader for VDB files. And this is what you can do with it. You can create some, primitive objects as input sources, make them a child of the volume builder, and this will create a volume out of that. And volumes are actually voxel grids, and voxels are a bit like pixels, but in 3D space. So pixels are just in 2D space, voxels are the same in 3D space. And then you can mesh them in order to render them and assign materials to them. Yeah. So the volume builder also has a layer-based interface. And this is very cool for modeling because you can apply very powerful Boolean operations. In this case, I subtract the helix from the tube to create a threading. And yeah, let's have a look at the video. So I modeled the thread and also the cap of the bottle using volumes. So I start by making the cylinder a child of the volume builder, and then it turns that into a volume. Here you've got the volume representation. In order to increase the resolution of the volume, you have to bring down the voxel size, and then you can just make other objects a child and use another blending mode. In this case, it was intersect. And then you add a few more, subtract them, add some, and so on. And it's a really fast workflow. I mean, you can model this in 3 minutes. It's just insane. Yeah, still adding and subtracting stuff. Here's the welding. And you can also use the fields to reshape some of these effects, or all of these filters actually. So in this case, I use a random field in order to make the welding here a bit, yeah, make it look used. And this is the volume. Now in order to render it, I need to mesh it. So I use the volume measure and make the volume builder a child of it. And then you will get the geometry that you can render then. Okay. Another cool thing you can do, so we support SDF volumes as well as fog volumes, and with fog volumes you can mesh noises, for example. You can create a random field and mesh the noise. Here's a nice dual mesh effect, or some water drops on a can. And you can also mesh growing effects, which opens up a whole new world of possibilities here. We also got a combine meshes command, which is based on OpenVDB. So you can set it up, press OK, and then you can merge these two objects. And in the end, you would go by with a smooth brush here and smooth it. And there you go. Then you can block out characters, for example. All right. Yeah, we also have a volume loader, so you can import and export VDB files. This is a modeling tool, so you cannot render volumes natively inside of Cinema 4D as smoke effects or so. Therefore, you need a third-party render engine that supports VDB rendering. And another cool thing here is the combination of fields and volumes, which is really powerful. So as I told you before, you can mesh noises, for example, and create effects like that. And it's all procedural. That's the cool thing about it. You can animate this. You can just adjust it by adjusting a few parameters. Really incredible. This is a Zima noise, meshed and textured. And here are some of the artworks that were created using our volume modeling tools. I mean, imagine modeling this by hand. This is just insane. And if you use volume modeling for that, it's very easy. Or things like that. That's a very thankful example. You just use primitives and place them on top of each other and then add them, subtract them, and so on. It's really fast. Here, some bottles with some iterations. Or this muffin box. A lot of stuff. Everything was done by using volume modeling here. I also like this one here. Here I created a mesmerizing effect, kind of. I don't know what it is, but, well, I like it too. Anyway. And I also like these guys. I have to bring up the volume first. These are really cool. I love them. Here, Glenn created them. Yeah. Also this. Created with volume modeling here and OpenVDBs. Volume modeling also has been used inside of commercial projects already, like in this by iXponsor. And now I've come to the other changes. So, the smaller ones. So first of all, we made a huge cleanup, and this means that we don't support Coffee anymore, the scripting language, and we don't support the C4D importer for scenes made with versions before release 12. But at Maxon Labs, we have two tools for finding and updating old scenes, and also for detecting scenes that are using Coffee. So you can convert them to Python, for example. Then the send to picture viewer command now works for all renderers, which is very handy. We've got a new gradient that is optimized for handling huge amounts of knots, and you can also set the interpolation of a knot per knot and not for the whole gradient. And you can multi-select the knots and scale them and move them and so on. We made some adjustments and updates to the color chooser. For example, hexadecimal is now not a preference anymore, but a mode. And we also have got this color picker if the color parameters are folded. Then we made some adjustments and updates to the Alembic features. A very interesting one is that you can now time remap baked Alembic stuff. So what you can do with that is you can add a time track, and you can have keyframe animation and dynamic simulation baked into an Alembic and time remap those things together. Like here, the car crashing into the wall here. So the simulation is baked using Alembic, and the car is keyframe animation, and by using a time track with time remapping, you can remap all of this at once. For all of the programmers out there, we've got a new console that supports a few more things. We continued working on the modeling features and brought them to the new core. A very cool thing here is that they are now preserving the surface attributes in a way better. And for example, if you inner extrude an object that already has a vertex map on it, the vertex map is now, well, blended correctly. And here is a list of all of the other features that made it into Cinema 4D Release 20. Actually, there is another slide here. So it's a whole bunch of stuff that was added to Cinema 4D Release 20, and I'm really excited about this release because for me personally, this is the biggest release since years, and it's so powerful. Just use it. Okay, and so much more. So this is the end of the presentation, actually. Thank you very much. And at the moment, we are hiring. Yeah. So if you are interested in working at Maxon, contact us and just apply for a job. So thank you very much.